The heavy wooden door of the courtroom swung shut with a loud thud, cutting off the noise from the busy hallway outside. Inside, the room was cold and smelled of old paper and polished wood. It was a Tuesday morning, and the schedule was packed. The judge sat high up on his bench, looking down at everyone through thick glasses. He was an older man with a tired face and a reputation for being very strict. He had seen hundreds of teenagers come through his court over the years, and he believed that being tough was the only way to teach them a lesson. In the defendant's chair sat a 17-year-old girl. She looked incredibly small in the large, empty room. Her name was Maya, but to the people in the court, she was just another case number. She was wearing a gray hoodie that was 2 sizes too big for her. The hood was pulled up over her head, and she was staring down at her sneakers as if they were the most interesting things in the world. She hadn't looked up once since the bailiff let her in. The prosecutor stood up. He was a young man with a crisp suit and a neat tie. He held a file in his hand and looked at the judge with confidence. "Your Honor," the prosecutor began, "the state is ready to proceed. This is a straightforward case of trespassing and unlawful entry." He turned to look at Maya, but she didn't move. She didn't blink. "The defendant was found inside the old industrial complex on the edge of town late last Friday night," the prosecutor continued. "This property is fenced off. There are no trespassing signs everywhere. It is a dangerous site. Buildings are collapsing, and there is a risk of hazardous waste." The police officers who arrived on the scene found the defendant hiding in one of the storage units. She had no legitimate reason to be there. The judge nodded slowly. He had heard this story 1,000 times. Kids looking for a thrill. Kids looking for a place to cause trouble or use drugs where no one can see them. "Is this correct?" the judge asked, looking down at Maya. "Did you enter the property without permission?" Maya's lawyer, a public defender named Mr. Evans, stood up. He looked tired. He had too many cases that day, and not enough time to prepare for any of them. He gently touched Maya's arm. "Maya," he whispered, "you need to answer the judge." Maya took a deep breath. She didn't lift her head. Her voice was so quiet that the people in the back of the room had to lean forward to hear her. "Yes," she said. "And why were you there?" the prosecutor asked quickly, jumping in before her lawyer could object. "Were you meeting friends? Were you drinking?" "No," Maya said. Again, the voice was tiny. "Then why?" The prosecutor pushed. "It's a simple question. What were you doing inside a fenced-off factory at midnight?" Maya hesitated. She gripped the edge of the table in front of her. Her knuckles turned white. It felt like the walls of the courtroom were closing in on her. She knew the truth sounded crazy. She knew that if she told them why she was really there, they would laugh at her. Or worse, they would think she was lying. "I was just looking," she mumbled. "Looking?" The judge's voice was sharp. He didn't like vague answers. "Looking for what?" Maya shrugged, still refusing to make eye contact. "Just looking around." The judge sighed loudly. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He had no patience for games. He looked at the prosecutor. "Is there any evidence of drugs or vandalism?" the judge asked. "No, Your Honor," the prosecutor admitted. "She didn't have spray paint. She didn't have drugs. She was just there. But she did have to cut a lock to get in. That shows intent. That shows a disregard for the law." The judge put his glasses back on and looked at Maya. He saw a teenager in a baggy hoodie, slouching in her seat, refusing to speak. He saw someone who didn't care about the authority of the court. To him, she looked like just another clueless kid who thought the rules didn't apply to her. He had seen this act before: the silent treatment, the attitude. "Young lady," the judge said, his voice echoing in the room. "Do you understand that you broke the law?" Maya nodded slightly. "Say it," the judge commanded. "Yes, sir," she whispered. "And do you understand that you put yourself in danger? That you forced the police to waste their time coming to get you, when they could have been stopping real crimes?" "Yes, sir." "But you still won't tell us why you were there," the judge said. He shook his head in disappointment. "You think this is a joke? You think you can sit there, ignore my questions, and just walk away?" "I'm not ignoring you," Maya said, a flash of emotion finally entering her voice. It wasn't anger. It was frustration. Certainly looks like it, the judge snapped. I have been on this bench for 20 years. I know exactly what happens to kids who just look around in abandoned buildings. It starts with trespassing. Then it escalates to theft. Then it's drugs. You are on a very dangerous path, young lady, and you are completely clueless about where it leads. The word clueless hung in the air. It stung Maya. She wasn't clueless. In fact, she probably knew more about that building than anyone else in the room. But she looked at the judge's stern face and the prosecutor's smug expression, and she felt a wave of hopelessness. They had already made up their minds about her. They saw a problem child, not a person with a reason. Mr. Evans, her lawyer, cleared his throat. Your Honor, the defendant is from a low-income family. She is a good student. This is her first offense. We are asking for leniency. Maybe community service? The judge picked up his pen. He was ready to write his decision. He didn't see any reason to be lenient. He hadn't seen a single sign of remorse or understanding from Maya. He just saw silence and a bad attitude. Leniency is for people who admit their mistakes and show they want to change, the judge said coldly. This defendant has shown me nothing but attitude. I am not going to give her a slap on the wrist when she clearly doesn't understand the severity of her actions. He tapped the pen on his desk. Tap, tap, tap. I was going to consider a pretrial diversion program, the judge continued, looking down at Maya. That would have kept this off your record if you stayed out of trouble for a year. But given your behavior here today, your refusal to cooperate, and your disrespectful silence, I cannot do that. Maya's heart sank. She had worked so hard to keep her record clean. She needed to get into college. A criminal record would destroy her chances. She opened her mouth to speak, to try to explain, but her throat felt dry and tight. The judge's glare stopped her words before they could form. Therefore, the judge announced, I am setting bail at $5,000. I am also setting a trial date. If you are found guilty, you will face the maximum penalty allowed by law. Maybe spending some time in a cell will help you understand that society has rules. The gavel rose in the air. The sound was inevitable. Maya squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the loud bang that would seal her fate. She felt the tears pricking her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction, but just as the gavel was about to come down, the heavy door at the back of the courtroom flew open with a bang that made everyone jump. The sudden bang of the heavy door swinging open cut through the silence like a knife. Every head in the room snapped toward the back of the courtroom. The clerk dropped her stamp. The police officer standing guard instinctively took a step forward, his hand resting on his belt. A man rushed in, breathing hard like he had just run a marathon. He wasn't wearing a police uniform, and he didn't look like a lawyer. He was wearing a wrinkled trench coat that looked like it hadn't seen a dry cleaner in months, and his hair was messy. He held a thick folder against his chest as if it were a shield. I'm sorry, Your Honor. The man gasped, leaning against the door frame to catch his breath. Please, don't hit that gavel yet. The judge froze, his hand still hovering in midair. He lowered the gavel slowly and stared at the intruder with a mix of shock and fury. The color in the judge's face rose from pale to bright red. This is a court of law, the judge bellowed, his voice bouncing off the high ceilings. Who are you? You cannot just burst into my courtroom. Bailiff, remove this man immediately. The bailiff started to move toward the stranger, but the man held up a hand. He was still panting, but his eyes were wide and urgent. Wait. Please, the man pleaded. My name is Daniel Henderson. I'm a journalist for the City Gazette. I have information about this case. Information that changes everything. The judge frowned deeply. He leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. We do not hold trials in the newspapers here. Mr. Henderson, get out before I hold you in contempt. It's not a trial. And it's not a story for the paper yet, Daniel said quickly. Stepping away from the door and walking toward the front of the room, I'm here because because Maya. She contacted me 3 weeks ago. The room went silent. The prosecutor looked confused, and Maya's lawyer, Mr. Evans, looked just as surprised as everyone else. Maya slowly lifted her head for the first time. Her eyes were wide, darting between the judge and the messy-haired man at the door. "Maya contacted you?" the judge asked, skepticism dripping from his voice. "And why should I care about a teenager talking to a reporter?" "Because she wasn't trespassing to vandalize anything," Daniel said. He reached the front of the room and placed the thick folder on the edge of the clerk's desk. "She wasn't there to party, and she wasn't there to do drugs. She was there because I asked her to meet me. I asked her to help me." The judge looked at the folder, then back at Daniel. "You asked a minor to break into a restricted area? That makes you an accomplice, not a hero." "No, you don't understand," Daniel said, shaking his head vigorously. "She didn't break in. She found a gap in the fence where it had already rusted through. And she wasn't just hanging out. Your Honor, look at the photos." Daniel opened the folder. It was stuffed with glossy pictures, charts, and handwritten notes. He pulled out a handful of photographs and held them up. "This is what Maya was doing in that factory," Daniel said, his voice trembling slightly with passion. "Look," the judge hesitated. He didn't want to encourage this chaos, but curiosity got the better of him. He waved his hand. "Bring them here." Daniel walked up the few steps to the judge's bench and handed over the photos. The room watched in silence as the judge put on his reading glasses and began to look. The first photo showed a close-up of a pipe. It was rusted and leaking a strange, bright green liquid onto the concrete floor. The next photo showed a puddle on the ground outside the building, with the same green liquid mixing with the rainwater. The photos after that showed Maya wearing gloves and a mask, carefully taking samples of the water into small glass vials. She wasn't holding a spray can. She was holding science equipment. "I've been investigating that old factory for 6 months," Daniel explained, turning to face the courtroom so everyone could hear. "That company abandoned the site 5 years ago, but they left the chemical tanks behind. They've been leaking into the soil. My sources told me the runoff was draining into the creek that flows through the residential district. The same creek where kids play and where people fish." The prosecutor stood up, looking annoyed. "Your Honor, this is irrelevant. Even if there is pollution, she still entered private property without permission. That is a crime." "I tried to get samples legally," Daniel interrupted, looking directly at the prosecutor. "I requested access from the city council 3 times. I was denied. I called the company. They hung up on me. I couldn't get onto the property to prove the leak without risking a lawsuit myself." He pointed a shaking finger at Maya. "She did it because she lives in that neighborhood. Her grandmother's house is 2 blocks away from that creek. She came to my office a month ago. She told me she read my articles and wanted to help. She said she knew a way in where the cameras couldn't see. She said she wanted to prove the water was making people sick." The judge flipped through another photo. It showed a notebook page filled with neat, precise handwriting. It listed chemical names, pH levels, and timestamps. It wasn't the scribbling of a bored teenager. It was the work of someone who was diligent, smart, and careful, Your Honor, Daniel continued, his voice cracking with emotion. "The sample she gave me last week, I had it tested at a private lab yesterday. The levels of lead and mercury in that water are 300 times over the safety limit. If that gets into the main water supply, it could be a public health disaster." Maya knew that. She risked getting arrested to save her neighbors. She's not a criminal. She's a hero. A heavy silence fell over the courtroom. The air felt different now. It wasn't just cold and judgmental anymore. It was thick with the weight of the truth. The judge looked at the photos for a long time. He looked at the picture of the girl in the hoodie, carefully handling a test tube near a puddle of toxic sludge. Then he looked down at Maya. She wasn't slouching anymore. She was sitting up straight, her hands resting in her lap. She looked terrified, but there was a fire in her eyes now. She knew she might still be in trouble, but she was glad the truth was out. She didn't care about herself. She just wanted people to know what was happening in that creek. Mr. Evans, her lawyer, stood up slowly. He seemed energized by this new information. "Your Honor, in light of these new circumstances, the circumstances of necessity, surely the state can see that this was an act of public service, not malice." The prosecutor looked at the photos, then at the judge. The wind had been taken out of his sails. Charging a girl with a crime for exposing a toxic waste dump was going to look terrible in the press, especially if a journalist was involved. The judge took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. He looked tired, but the angry redness had faded from his face. He felt a sinking feeling in his stomach. He realized he had been seconds away from sending a brave young girl to jail, all because he assumed she was just another clueless kid causing trouble. He had judged the book by the cover without bothering to read a single page. He tapped the photos on the desk, lining them up perfectly. He looked at Maya, and this time his gaze wasn't stern. It was questioning, "Is this true, Maya?" The judge asked softly, "Is this why you were there?" Maya stood up. She brushed the hair out of her face. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice clear and strong. The smell was getting worse. "My grandmother has been coughing a lot lately. I saw the sludge in the creek and I knew it wasn't right. I just wanted to get proof so someone would listen," the judge sighed. He looked at the prosecutor. "Do you still wish to proceed with the charges of trespassing?" The prosecutor shuffled his papers. "The state would need some time, too. Review this new evidence, Your Honor," the judge nodded. He looked back at Daniel Henderson, the journalist. "You said you tested the water?" "Yes, Your Honor. The report is in the folder." The judge picked up the folder. He looked at the people in the room, then back at Maya. He realized that the gavel he was holding a moment ago represented a mistake, a big one. But he also knew that he had the power to fix it. The court wasn't just about punishing the guilty. It was about finding the truth. And the truth was currently standing in a baggy hoodie, waiting to see if justice was real. "All right," the judge said, his voice calm but grave. "We are taking a recess. But I want everyone to know we are not coming back to finish a sentencing. We are coming back to discuss how to fix this." He slammed the gavel down, but this time the sound didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a beginning. The heavy wooden doors of the courtroom swung shut, sealing everyone inside for a temporary break. The atmosphere in the room had completely changed. Just minutes before, the air was thick with boredom and the heavy hand of authority. Now, a quiet buzz filled the space. People were whispering, craning their necks to get a look at the teenager in the oversized hoodie and the disheveled journalist who had rushed in. Maya sat back down in her chair. Her heart was still beating fast, thumping against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked over at Daniel, the journalist. He gave her a tired but reassuring smile from the bench in the back. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. For the first time that morning, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen, but it was a terrifying feeling to be the center of so much attention. The judge had not left his bench. He remained seated, reading through the documents in the folder over and over again. His face was hidden behind his hand, but everyone could tell his mood had shifted. The anger was gone, replaced by something much heavier: regret. Mr. Evans, Maya's lawyer, leaned over the table. He looked at Maya with new respect. "You did good, kid," he whispered, "but we need to make sure we tell the rest of the story correctly. He needs to understand why you didn't just say this from the start." Maya nodded slowly. She looked down at her hands. "I didn't think he would believe me," she said softly. "Grown-ups never do. They just see a kid with messy clothes and assume I'm up to no good." The bailiff called out, "All rise," and the room fell silent again. The judge looked up. He didn't look stern anymore. He looked tired and thoughtful. He adjusted his glasses and looked directly at Maya. "Maya," the judge said. His voice was much softer than before. "I have read the report from the lab. I have seen the photographs. It seems I owe you an apology." A quiet murmur went through the room. Judges rarely apologized, especially to teenagers. "I called you clueless earlier," the judge continued. "I told you that you were wasting the court's time and that you had no respect for the law. I see now that I was the one who was not fully informed. It appears you were not only respecting the law, but you were trying to protect your community in a way that the authorities failed to do." Maya felt a lump form in her throat. She blinked rapidly, fighting back tears. Hearing the judge say those words washed away the shame she had been feeling all morning. "However," the judge said, leaning forward, "there is still one thing I don't understand. Mr. Henderson says you contacted him. You gathered this evidence. But why didn't you tell the police? When they arrested you, why didn't you explain what you were doing? Why did you stay silent? Maya stood up. She smoothed the front of her hoodie. She took a moment to look around the room. She saw the prosecutor looking at his shoes. She saw the court stenographer waiting with her fingers hovering over the keys. She looked at the judge. "'Cause I tried to tell them before, Your Honor," Maya said. Her voice shaking slightly, but growing stronger with every word. 2 months ago, I noticed the water in the creek behind my house looked weird. It had an oily film on top. The fish were floating on the surface. It smelled like rotten eggs. She pointed toward the window, as if the factory was just outside. My grandmother lives in that house. She's 78 years old. She gets her water from a well in the backyard. I was scared she was getting sick because of that water. The courtroom was dead silent. Everyone was listening now. I went to the police station, Maya continued. I walked in and told the officer at the desk that I thought someone was dumping chemicals. I told him I had pictures. Do you know what he said to me? The judge shook his head slowly. No, Maya. What did he say? He laughed, Maya said, her voice tight with the memory. He said, "Go home, little girl. Stop watching so much TV. This is a factory town. Factories smell. Don't make up stories." He wouldn't even look at my phone. She took a deep breath. Then I went to the city council. I tried to speak during the public comment section, but they said I wasn't on the agenda. They told me to leave because I was disrupting the meeting. One councilman told me to focus on my schoolwork and let the adults handle the big problems. The judge winced. He looked down at the desk. So, when I found the gap in the fence at the factory, Maya said, I didn't know what else to do. I thought, if I can get the proof real, it's undeniable proof, then they will have to listen. I knew it was illegal to go in there. I knew I wasn't supposed to be there. But I felt like I had to choose between following the rules and keeping my grandmother safe. She looked the judge right in the eye. I chose my grandmother. The silence in the room was heavy now. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was a respectful one. The prosecutor cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. He glanced at the file in front of him, probably realizing that charging this girl would be a public relations nightmare. Daniel Henderson stood up again. Your Honor, if I may add to that, when Maya brought the samples to me, I was skeptical too, but she knew exactly what she was doing. She has been studying chemistry at the public library every day after school for a year. She taught herself how to test pH levels and identify heavy metals. She didn't just look around. She conducted a scientific investigation because the adults in charge were ignoring the problem. The judge picked up the lab report again. He looked at the numbers. High levels of mercury, lead, arsenic. It was dangerous stuff. If this got into the town's water supply, people would get sick. Children could get permanently hurt, Mr. Henderson, the judge said. Is this report accurate? Can it be used in a court of law? Yes, Your Honor, Daniel replied firmly. I had it certified by a top independent lab. It holds up, and the judge said, closing the folder with a soft snap. It appears that we have a much larger issue here than a trespassing charge. We have a potential environmental hazard. He looked at Maya. You sat in my court and let me scold you. You let me call you a criminal? Why didn't you interrupt me then? Maya shrugged her shoulders, looking down for a second before looking back up. Because I know how this looks. I know I look like a delinquent. I was wearing a hoodie. I was in a place I wasn't supposed to be. I thought if I tried to explain, you would just think I was making up excuses. I thought I would have to wait for the trial to show the evidence. I was scared. The judge took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. He let out a long, slow breath, and I was arrogant. I assumed that because you were young, you had nothing of value to contribute. I judged you by your appearance and my own bias, not by your actions. He picked up his pen, but he didn't tap it this time. He held it still. The law is supposed to serve justice, the judge said, speaking mostly to himself, but loud enough for everyone to hear. Justice isn't just about punishing people who break rules. It's about truth. The truth is, this young woman broke a minor rule to prevent a major catastrophe. That is not the behavior of a criminal. That is the behavior of a responsible citizen. He looked at the prosecutor. Does the state still wish to pursue the trespassing charge? The prosecutor looked at Maya, then at the judge, and finally at the door where the press was probably waiting. He stood up slowly. Your Honor, given the mitigating circumstances and the nature of the evidence, the state is willing to dismiss all charges against the defendant. A quiet cheer went through the back of the room, but the bailiff quickly shushed them. I am not finished, the judge said. He looked at Maya with a serious expression. Maya, I am dismissing the case. Your record will remain clean. But I want to promise you something else. You came to this court looking for justice, and you were disappointed. I am going to make sure that stops today. He turned to the clerk. Please enter that folder as Exhibit A in the public record immediately. I am also signing an emergency order this afternoon to launch an official environmental investigation into that factory site. We will get to the bottom of this. Maya finally let the tears fall. They weren't tears of sadness anymore. She wiped her face with her sleeve, not caring about her makeup. It was over. She wasn't a criminal, and more importantly, people were finally going to listen. Thank you, she whispered. The judge nodded. No, Maya, thank you. You taught me a lesson today. I hope I can be as wise as you are when I grow up. With that, he slammed the gavel down one last time. The sound rang out, loud and clear. It was the sound of a gavel that didn't bring punishment, but protection. And as Maya walked out of the courtroom, holding her head high, she knew that her life was going to be very different from now on. The sound of the gavel seemed to hang in the air even after the echo died away. It wasn't the sharp, angry bang from before. It was final, but it felt different, like a door opening rather than closing. The courtroom sat in a strange, quiet stillness for a moment. People looked at each other, unsure if they were allowed to move or speak. Maya stood up. Her legs felt a little shaky, like jelly. She reached across the table to shake Mr. Evans's hand. Her lawyer, who had been slouching in his chair just an hour ago, now stood up straight with a genuine smile. He shook her hand firmly, looking her in the eyes with a look of deep respect. You did something incredible today, Maya, he said softly. I've been doing this for a long time, and I've never seen anything like that. Thank you for believing in me, Maya whispered back. She turned around and saw Daniel. The journalist, waiting for her by the wooden gate that separated the spectators from the court. He held the folder under his arm, protecting it like it was a newborn baby. He opened the small gate for her, and Maya walked through it. It felt like walking through a barrier into a new life. She was no longer a defendant. She was a free young woman. As they walked out of the courtroom and into the long marble hallway, the noise hit them. It was a roar of voices, camera flashes popping like lightning, and microphones being shoved forward. News crews from all over the city had gathered. They had heard about the dramatic interruption in the courtroom and the allegations of toxic waste. They wanted to see the clueless teen who had outsmarted everyone. Maya shrank back, pulling her hood up. The crowd of reporters was overwhelming. Stay close to me, Daniel said. He put a reassuring hand on her shoulder and stepped in front of her like a shield. No questions right now. Daniel shouted over the noise. She is a minor. We will have a statement later. Let her through. He guided her through the crush of bodies. Flashbulbs went off in their faces, blinding them. Questions were fired at Maya from all sides. Maya, how does it feel to be a hero? One reporter yelled, Did you know you were breaking the law? Another asked, Are you going to sue the police department? A third one screamed. Maya kept her head down, staring at her sneakers. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt like a kid who just wanted to go home and sleep. She didn't want to answer questions. She just wanted the noise to stop. They finally pushed through the heavy glass doors at the end of the hall and stepped out into the afternoon sun. The air was crisp and cool. It smelled like rain was coming, but to Maya, it smelled like freedom. The noise of the reporters was muffled by the heavy doors. Though she could still see their cameras pressed against the glass, outside, sitting on a bench near the courthouse steps, was an elderly woman. She was wearing a knitted shawl, even though it wasn't that cold, and she had a walking cane resting on her lap. It was Maya's grandmother. She looked frail, but her eyes were bright and filled with worry. When she saw Maya walk out, she stood up, using the cane for support, her face lighting up with relief. "Grandma!" Maya cried out. She ran down the steps, forgetting about the cameras, forgetting about the court case. She just wanted to hug her grandmother. The two embraced tightly on the sidewalk. It was a moment of pure human connection that made the reporters inside go quiet as they watched through the glass. "I was so scared, Grandma," Maya whispered into her shoulder. "I thought they were going to take me away." "I know, my love. I know," her grandmother said, stroking Maya's hair. "That man, Mr. Henderson, he called me. He told me what you did. You were trying to save me." "I had to." Maya pulled back, wiping her eyes. "The water. I knew it was bad. I trust you," her grandmother said firmly. "I always have. Even when no one else did." Daniel stood a few feet away, giving them space. He watched the scene with a soft smile. He knew that this moment was more important than any news story. He watched the way Maya protected her grandmother, helping her sit back down on the bench. He realized that this teenage girl carried the weight of the world on her shoulders. But she did it out of love, not anger. Suddenly, the side door of the courthouse opened again. The judge stepped out. He was wearing his long black robe, but he didn't look like the powerful man from the bench anymore. He looked like an ordinary man, tired and thoughtful. The reporters inside the glass turned their cameras toward him, expecting a statement. But the judge ignored them. He walked down the steps slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. He walked right up to the bench where Maya and her grandmother were sitting. Maya stiffened. Instinctively, she thought she was in trouble again. But the judge stopped in front of them and took off his glasses. He looked at Maya's grandmother first. "Ma'am," he said, nodding his head respectfully. "Your granddaughter is a very remarkable person." Grandmother smiled, squeezing Maya's hand. "I have always thought so, Your Honor." The judge let out a short, humble chuckle. "Well, it took me a while to see it. I was blind to it today. I treated her poorly. I want to apologize to you, too. If I had listened to her, we could have protected you sooner." "We are okay now," the grandmother said kindly. "Justice is done." The judge looked at Maya. "I've signed the order, Maya. The investigation starts tomorrow. The factory will be shut down immediately until we know it's safe. You did that? It's not me. Not the police. You." Maya looked up at him. She saw a man who wasn't afraid to admit he was wrong. It made him seem human. "I just wanted to help," she said simply. "You did more than help," the judge said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. He didn't give it to her like a legal document. He held it out like a peace offering. "If you ever need anything, a recommendation for college, or help with a legal issue for your science club, call me. You have friends in high places now." Maya took the card. It was simple and white, with the court seal on it. She didn't expect to ever use it, but she kept it close. "Thank you, Your Honor," she said. "Please," the judge said, smiling for the first time. "Call me Thomas." He turned and walked back up the stairs. As he reached the top, the reporters burst out the doors again, swarming him. "Judge, Judge, what do you have to say about the case?" shouted one reporter, shoving a microphone in his face. The judge paused. He looked at the camera, then back at Maya and her grandmother. He spoke clearly so everyone could hear. "I have to say that today, the justice system was humbled," the judge told the cameras. "We often think we know everything because we sit on the bench. We look at young people and we see trouble. But today, a 17-year-old girl taught me what real responsibility looks like. She wasn't clueless. She was the smartest person in my courtroom." Reporters scribbled furiously. It wasn't every day a judge said something like that. "And let me be clear," the judge added. "The city will be investigating that chemical leak with the full force of the law. We owe it to this young woman to finish what she started." As the flashbulbs popped around him, the judge didn't look annoyed anymore. He looked determined. He walked back inside, ready to do the work that Maya had started. Daniel walked over to Maya. "Well," he said, "are you ready to go home?" "Yes," Maya said. She stood up, helping her grandmother to her feet. The three of them walked away from the courthouse. The reporters stayed behind, watching them go. They knew there would be headlines tomorrow. They knew there would be talk of awards and lawsuits. But for now, They just watched three figures walking down the street: an old woman, journalist, and a teenager in a baggy hoodie. They walked away from the fear and the judgment. They walked toward the quiet dignity of their own lives. Maya didn't look back. She didn't need to. She knew that the fight wasn't over. Cleaning up the factory would take a long time. But the most important battle was already won. She had been heard. She had been believed. And she knew, without a doubt, that her voice mattered. The days turned into weeks, and the noise from the reporters eventually faded away. The news cycle moved on to the next big story.
Ow.
But in the quiet neighborhood near the creek, things were just beginning to change. The factory, which had sat silent and rusting for years, was now a hive of activity. Heavy trucks drove in and out, and workers in white protective suits walked around the fenced-off area. It looked like a movie set, but for the people living there, it was a relief. The judge's order had worked. The investigation proved Daniel and Maya right. The chemicals were real, and they were dangerous. The company responsible for the mess was forced to pay for the cleanup. They tried to fight it at first, claiming it was too expensive, but the judge didn't back down. He remembered the girl in the hoodie and the look in her grandmother's eyes. He made sure the company followed the law. Maya went back to school. At first, it was strange. When she walked into her chemistry class, the other students stared at her. Some of them whispered. They had seen her on the news or read about her online. For a long time, she had been the quiet kid in the back of the room, the one who kept to herself. Now, she was famous. Is it true? You got arrested? A boy named Jason asked her as she sat down. Maya nodded. Yeah, it's true, but you proved them wrong. Jason asked, sounding impressed. You found the poison? I didn't find it alone, Maya said, taking her notebook out. I just helped. Jason looked at her with new respect. Before that day, he had probably ignored her. Now, he realized she was one of the smartest people in the class. The label of clueless had been replaced with genius. It felt strange, but it was a lot better than being invisible. One afternoon, a letter arrived at Maya's house. It was a thick envelope with the logo of a big university on the corner. Maya's hands shook as she opened it. It was an offer for a full scholarship. It wasn't just for tuition. It covered books, housing, and everything. It was a Science for Change scholarship set up by a group of people who had heard her story. They wanted to support students who used science to help their communities. Her grandmother cried when Maya told her. She held the letter like it was a precious document. I always knew you would go far, she said, wiping her eyes. I just wish your parents could see you. Maya hugged her tight. Her parents had passed away when she was little, and being raised by her grandmother was sometimes hard, especially with money problems. But they had always had each other. This scholarship wasn't just money, it was freedom. It meant Maya didn't have to worry about how to pay for college. It meant she could keep learning. The judge, Thomas, kept his promise too. He didn't just write a recommendation letter, he came to visit. One Saturday morning, he pulled up to their small house in an ordinary car, wearing a sweater and jeans instead of his black robe. It was a surreal sight for Maya, the most powerful judge in the city, sitting on her old, worn-out sofa drinking tea. He didn't come to talk about the law. He came to talk to Maya about her future. They sat in the living room, and Thomas listened to Maya talk about chemistry, biology, and her dream of becoming an environmental scientist. He didn't judge or interrupt. He just listened. You have a rare gift, Maya, Thomas told her before he left. You see things that other people ignore. Don't ever lose that. The world needs more people who care enough to act. Before he left, he handed Maya a small check. It wasn't a bribe or a charity handout. It was from the Bar Association Community Fund. It was enough to fix the leaky roof on her grandmother's house and buy a new water filtration system for the kitchen. This isn't a gift, Thomas said, holding up his hand when Maya tried to refuse. This is justice. You protected the community. Now the community is protecting you. That evening, Maya stood on the small bridge over the creek behind her house. The water was clear now. The oily film was gone, and the bad smell had disappeared. You could see small fish darting around in the shallows. She saw a family of ducks paddling near the bank. It was a small thing, a normal thing, but to Maya, It was beautiful. She remembered how scared she was sitting in that courtroom, waiting for the judge to send her away. She remembered the feeling of being powerless. But looking at the clean water, she realized that she had never been powerless. She just needed to find her voice. Daniel, the journalist, walked up the path to join her. He was carrying a copy of the newspaper with a picture of the factory on the front page. Company just agreed to pay a huge fine, Daniel said, leaning on the railing next to her. The money is going to build a new park right here, where the factory used to be. They are naming it Hope Park. Maya smiled. That's a good name. I was going to write one more article, Daniel said, about where you are now, about the scholarship, but I wanted to ask you first. Maya looked at him. You can write it, but don't make it sound like I did it all alone. I couldn't have done it without your help or the judge's help, maybe Daniel said. But you were the spark, Maya. Without you, the rest of us would still be in the dark. Life didn't become a fairy tale overnight. Maya still had to study hard. She still had chores to do. Her grandmother still got sick sometimes and needed extra care. But the heavy cloud of fear that had hung over their lives was gone. They didn't have to worry about the water coming out of the tap. They didn't have to worry about being ignored. The change in Maya was the biggest difference. She walked a little taller now. She didn't hide in her hoodie as much. When she saw something wrong, she didn't just stay silent. She spoke up. She joined the school debate team. She started a science club to test the water in other streams near the town. A few months later, Maya stood on a stage in the school auditorium. It was graduation day. She was wearing her cap and gown, standing at the podium to give the valedictorian speech. Her grandmother was sitting in the front row, beaming with pride. Judge Thomas was there too, sitting a few rows back, watching quietly. Maya looked out at the sea of faces. She saw her teachers, her friends, and people from the neighborhood. She took a deep breath. When I was younger, Maya began, her voice clear and steady, echoing through the hall. I thought that having a voice meant being the loudest person in the room. I thought it meant being famous or being in charge. But I learned something different. She paused, looking over at her grandmother and then toward the judge. I learned that having a voice means caring about something more than your own fear. It means doing the right thing, even when no one is watching, and even when the odds are against you. I used to think that one person couldn't make a difference. I thought I was just a clueless teenager. The room was quiet, hanging on her every word. But I learned that if you speak the truth, and if you refuse to give up, the world will eventually listen. We all have that power. We all have the ability to change things right where we are. When she finished speaking, the auditorium erupted in applause. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was a roar. Maya stood there, soaking it in. She wasn't the same scared girl who sat in the defendant's chair that day. She was a leader. She was a scientist. And most importantly, she was herself as she walked off the stage. Her diploma in hand, the sun was setting outside the windows, casting a golden light over the room. It was the end of her high school years, but just the beginning of her story. And as she looked out at the horizon, she knew that no matter what challenges came next, she would be ready to face them. She was no longer clueless. She was awake, and she was ready to make the world a better place.